lords have to take time to rally their banners and set up supply chains before trying to join the larger host of their allies. Thus, when the Dance of the Dragons broke out, it took several weeks for the biggest allies of King Aegon II and the Greens, House Hightower, to rally their troops and begin their march to King's Landing. In their way was several smaller armies from the Reach, siding with Queen Rhaenyra and the Blacks. It would take weeks for the Hightower host to reach the capital, time King Aegon II did not have to waste. While the Greens at first had the upper hand during the start of the war, winning several key engagements, the proximity of Dragonstone, and thus the dragons of the Blacks, was a looming threat to King Aegon, even after the victories at Rook's Rest and the Battle of the Gullet, which saw the Blacks lose 2 dragons. If Aegon was going to win the war, he needed manpower from his biggest supporters, House Hightower. Thus, Lord Ormond Hightower set out from Oldtown with a large host of nearly 20,000 men, though at this time he left behind the king's youngest brother, the 15-year-old Prince Daeron, and his dragon Tessarion. But as they marched, Lord Ormond quickly found himself caught between 2 armies. Thaddeus Rowan, Lord of Goldengrove, and Tom Flowers, the bastard of Bitterbridge, were bearing down on him from the northeast with a great host of mounted knights, on par with the size and strength of his own army. Meanwhile, Sir Alan Beesbury, Lord Alan Tarley, and Lord Owen Costain had joined their power to cut off his retreat back to Oldtown with a much smaller force, but large enough to prevent the retreat and allowing the Blacks to close in on Lord Ormond from 2 fronts, effectively splitting his strength between 2 enemies. Lord Ormond chose the only option available to him, to carry on his march towards King's Landing and deal with his foes as and when they appeared. While they were outnumbered, the Hightower army had one huge asset still in reserve at Oldtown that they could call upon if needed, a dragon rider, Prince Daeron. If the Reach Lords had learned anything from the conquest of Aegon Targaryen and the massacre of House Gardner, the former kings of the Reach at the Field of Fire, it is the power a dragon holds cannot be overlooked. Slowly, the enemy host closed around the Hightower forces on the banks of the Honeywine River. Both the larger northern host and the smaller southern pressed their attack to the front and rear of the Hightower forces at the same time, effectively splitting the strength of the Hightowers in half, with each having to deal with a separate foe. Though Lord Hightower expected this, he saw his lines start to crumble much faster than he had expected as his foes fought ferociously. Defeat seemed certain and imminent as his forces were pushed further and further back. That's until a large black shadow swept across the battlefield as a terrible roar resounded overhead, slicing through the sound of steel on steel. A dragon had come. Lord Hightower's plea for help had been answered, albeit late. The dragon was Tessarion, the Blue Queen, cobalt and copper. On her back rode the youngest of Queen Alicent's 3 sons, Daeron Targaryen, 15, Lord Ormond's squire, the gentle and soft-spoken lad who'd once been a milk brother to Prince Jacaerys, who himself was floating in the depths of the Narrow Sea by this point in the war. The arrival of Daeron and his dragon reversed the tide of the battle with almost immediate effect. Everyone knew what the arrival of the dragon meant, and many did not wish to burn to death. It was now Lord Ormond's men attacking, screaming curses at their foes, while the forces of the Blacks fled en masse, some even choosing to risk jumping into the Honeywine River itself, then come face to face with the fires of a dragon. By the end of that long, bloody day, Lord Rowan was retreating north with the small remnants of his host. Tom Flowers lay dead and burned among the grass. The 2 Allans had been taken captive, and Lord Costain was dying from a wound. For now, the Blacks would struggle to put up any true, meaningful resistance to Lord Ormond's march to King's Landing, especially with the dragon now part of the march. As the wolves and ravens fed upon the bodies of the slain, Ormond Hightower feasted Prince Daeron on aurochs and strong wine, and dubbed him a knight, with the storied Valyrian steel longsword of House Hightower vigilance, and naming him Sir Daeron The Daring for his fearless attack on the Blacks. The prince modestly replied, "My lord is kind to say so, but this victory really belongs to Tessarion, not me." While the Battle of the Honeywine was a small conflict when compared to the scale of the battles to come in the Dance of the Dragons. It very nearly went in the favour of the Blacks, if it had not been for Prince Daeron and his dragon. Had the Hightower host been broken on the banks of the Honeywine, the Reach would have effectively been under the control of the Blacks, making King Aegon II's position very perilous, perhaps speeding up the eventual fall of King's Landing. But for Rhaenyra and the Blacks, without the looming threat of the Hightower host marching across the realm, and the huge losses the Blacks faced during the Battle of Tumbleton, it could be that Rhaenyra could have held on to King's Landing for longer, with less chance of the unrest that came with her brief control of the city. Wars are complex, with events all feeding into each other. Even the outcomes of small battles, such as the Honeywine, could have far-reaching effects that cannot be foreseen.